This is a show that brings to the forefront newsmakers, entertainers, and those making a difference in our lives and in our world. Each week is a new adventure with topics ranging from the most serious and cutting edge to the most lighthearted and entertaining.
This is Taking Care of Business with Richard Solomon.
Greetings, everyone. Richard Solomon, Taking Care of Business. And we have a really important show this week. We've engaged Vanessa McMullan of North Shore Child Guidance right here in Long Island. And we're going to talk about talking to children, especially younger children, about tragic types of events they see all the time in the news. They hear from siblings and classmates, all kinds of very tough news. You know, when we had 9/11, the first 9/11, the second 9/11, things that happened in schools, things that happened in different places, the Boston Marathon. So, Vanessa, thank you for being with us, because we really need someone who can help us. And I know this is an important resource to a lot of people out there. Tell me a little bit about yourself first.
Well, I work, as you said, for North Shore Child and Family Guidance Center, and we are a not-for-profit children's mental health agency on Long Island. We have been around for over 60 years, and we work with families ranging from children birth all the way up to 24 on pretty much anything that you can imagine that affects young children. We do mental health, we do parenting work, we do substance abuse, we do academic and learning issues, we do respite and trying to help kids engage in other things outside in the community, like a wilderness program. We have organic gardens, really trying to find creative ways to work with children and families on very stressful issues. So I work at the Marks Family Right from the Start Center, which is our early childhood program based in Manhasset, and that ranges from, again, birth up to age about 10, and I'm the supervisor here, and I also coordinate the Diane Goldberg Maternal Depression Program that works with new moms who are experiencing perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, as well as working with young children. So it's a great agency, wonderful program, and I've been here for over 10 years, so we do wonderful work here.
Now, what is your background? Is it psychology?
I am a licensed clinical social worker.
Okay.
So, and I'm a supervisor here.
Wow. You must deal with some very tough circumstances.
Yes, we do. We deal with, children who are experiencing, typical transitional issues, like maybe the stress of a divorce or a parent separation, as well as depression or anxiety. We have some kids who have developmental delays. We have kids with ADHD and oppositional behaviors, kids who are struggling in school or struggling at home socially. We have kids with more significant mental health issues, maybe some kids who are feeling suicidal. So we really, even young children need help. So I think that that's something that's not always recognized, that you can intervene at a young age and help these kids.
I have to ask sort of a tough question.
Sure.
Is it harder to be a child today than it's ever been?
I think so.
Because I think so, but, because it just seems that the world is flooded with technology and more responsibility at earlier ages. I see prior generations of people, they played outside more, they had less homework, they had less responsibilities. Right. And now I see younger children are, reading at really early ages. They have more responsibilities. They go to school much earlier than anyone I know in many prior generations of the past.
There's a lot more pressure starting at a young age, and that your question is actually one that I've posed to parents at different workshops. And the consensus is that it's harder to be a kid now. Sometimes they're talking about like application process for school for a 3-year-old, where there's a different emphasis on curriculum and learning, where you're finding sometimes these kids don't necessarily develop the basic social, emotional health skills that they need in order to be good students when they get a little bit older. Those things are kind of getting pushed aside so that kids are more ready to take on reading and writing and math, where, maturity-wise, they're not there yet. So it's kind of misguided in a lot of ways.
Is it also more problematic that we have the types of entertainment that we have? It's probably a little bit more violent, a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more suggestive than it's ever been, and at younger ages?
Yes. Kids are being exposed to a lot of things that they can't make sense of in a lot of ways. And one of the struggles I think that a lot of parents are dealing with that I speak to is, when you're trying to grapple with giving your kids access to technology, whether it's their own cell phone or using different apps or websites on the internet, it's got this social component, so they don't want their children to be left out. But meanwhile, they're exposing their kids to things that they don't know what to do with. They can't necessarily distinguish what's real, what's fantasy, or that things you see on the screen or things you see in a video game you can't do in real life. Their brains aren't ready to make those implications yet. So, it's setting them up for problems.
Right, especially when they see that, in the prior generations, there was more things like, Bugs Bunny, which was kind of violent, and Tom and Jerry. But it doesn't seem that it was as violent as some of the stuff today.
No. And, I know there's those suggested ratings, but a lot of kids and families are really not following those. We have kids that are playing video games that are way above where they're at maturity-wise, that they shouldn't be, things that they shouldn't be seeing.
So how do you talk to children about just what we're talking about now, which is to distinguish between cartoons and animated features on television and reality when their sense of reality is so basic?
Well, a lot of it really starts with making sure you are monitoring what they have access to and really limiting what they have access to in a lot of ways. A lot of families really don't want to think about really how to talk to their kids about the negative stuff that's out there, because especially with young children, we think they don't know. We think that they're not paying attention. We think that they, just because maybe they haven't seen the news directly in your home, means that they don't know what's going on. So we think that by avoiding these kinds of conversations, we're shielding them. And, of course that's what we want. We want to think of our 4-year-old as innocent and, not really teaching them the harsh realities of the world at such a young age. But as the adults, we have this obligation that we have to find a way to address it in an age-appropriate way. So step one really, like I said, goes with limiting what they have access to. So just because we think they might be playing with blocks and not paying attention or not listening to the phone call, we know that they are absolutely perceptive. They are listening, they are looking. So you might think that they're not watching the news in the background, but they're hearing stuff. And again, they can't really make sense of it. And when they're seeing these images of traumatic events being played over and over again, they don't recognize that this happened maybe one time and it's just a replay. They see it in the morning, they see it in the afternoon, they see it happening over and over again, and that's, overwhelming and scary. And when it's not explained to them about what happened, we know that kids also kind of draw their own conclusions, and most of the time their conclusions are wrong and can be actually worse than what reality is. So it's important for the kids to feel that the adults around them are going to provide them with the right information about what's going on.
Well, what's interesting is, at least from personal observations, I noticed that children can be very literal, and they take that extrapolation from one event, and they're very literal to another event.
Yes.
Because that's their frame of reference.
Yes.
But like you said, it's not always apples and oranges. Mm-hmm. And how do you explain to them that the reality that they experienced in situation A, if you don't do this, this will happen. And then they do some other behavior and they think, oh my God, this is going to happen to me. And then that's not going to happen. It's just, that's too dramatic. But recently with all of the school shootings and things that have unfortunately been happening in the news, that is something from young children really all the way up that kids are scared about. If it happened at one school, what's to say it's not going to happen at mine?
So, they need to be told that they're safe. They need to be, confronted with their feelings and let them know it's okay to be scared. It's okay to be sad or be confused or be angry about what happened. And this is how we're going to deal with it. This is how we're going to help you. This is how we know that you are safe. Because, school is supposed to be a safe place. So when you hear even one story that really highlights how school maybe isn't always a safe place in some areas, it's hard to let that go.
Well, especially when there are, on a micro level, I'm sure to some extent there's some levels of bullying almost everywhere.
Yeah.
So, and I'm sure that children, whether they see it directly or indirectly or hear about it or whatever, bullying must make people feel somewhat unsafe. And then if you throw on top of that all these other safety issues, such as, unfortunately, like a school shooting or some other kind of event inside a school, I have a feeling that, you could say to children, all right, look, that was, an isolated incident, but bullying is not necessarily isolated to, quote, other places.
Right.
That happens, I guess, every schoolyard, everywhere, and in homes, between siblings and all, cousins and, whatever, So how do you explain that when there is something that they definitely see, and then you try to say something like, well, see, the bullying is real and we have to deal with it, but the much more problematic things like, say, a mass shooting or some kind of mass tragedy is somehow different, when to them they're scared of both?
Well, for younger children, when you're trying to address these, bigger global incidents, we try not to give too many specifics because, again, that kind of information can possibly trigger more anxiety or make them more afraid. So we try not to link it to something that they might experience, like bullying. We don't want to say that this is a bully who then turned around and did something very bad or very dangerous. We would say, somebody came, or, we would try to make it so that it was less personal.
Okay.
So that they wouldn't then have that internal fear of relating it to something that they, could specifically
can relate to.
Right, in their own life. But one of the ways that we work with children around bullies is letting them know that it's okay to talk to an adult. And you should be going home and you should be telling your parents what happens at school, and you should be telling, and we try to work on the difference between what's being mean and what's actually being a bully, because you have some kids that, tell for everything, and that's very age appropriate with young ones. But, there are things that are more serious and things that need an adult attention, or things that persist. We want to give kids the coping skills to say, hey, don't say that to me, or, if you say that to me again, I'm going to tell the teacher. And really kind of encouraging kids to be a little bit empowered, because empowerment, I feel like, is something that's just such a good life skill to have. But, that the adults are the ones that really need to intervene in a lot of these ways, so that and schools are actually taking bullying very seriously now. There's all of these new initiatives to try to intervene with bullying and try to make these schools, kind of bully-free zones and looking after what's going on. But that it's the adult's responsibility. These kids are not in charge of themselves. It's up to the adults to really look and say, this is not going to happen in my classroom. This is not going to happen in my gym. This is not going to happen on my property.
So how do you give tools to children? How does that work?
Well, coping skills is, something that we're not born with. It's something that is developed. Developing a sense of resiliency is a really important life skill, and it's something that really needs to be modeled for kids. So even as we're talking about how to talk to kids about difficult topics and difficult life stressors, things being modeled for them is really essential. Feelings, even negative feelings, are part of life. It would be wonderful if we could take away sadness and anger and pain, but the harsh reality is they're there, and we have to learn how to deal with them. And as hard as it is to sit and watch your child struggle, or to kind of let your kid tough it out and figure out how to cope, if they don't learn how to do it at 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, it's harder to learn it when they're older. And I think we all know people that are, we have an example of someone in our mind who never learned how to cope as an adult. So, really letting them know it's okay to be sad. It's okay to be mad. Those feelings, we deal with them and they pass. So we do a lot of emotional regulation skills about how to help kids manage their feelings, like anxiety reduction, how to do mindfulness, do deep breathing, stress relief. We talk about the connection between, physical, our feelings and our physical health, so that sometimes when we're angry, we need to get those feelings out. So we can squeeze a stress ball. We can punch a pillow. We can, if we need to yell into a pillow, that's okay. These feelings need to come out of our body somehow. Because when we hold them in, it doesn't help us feel good. But also how the adults model these. So, letting parents know you can model what it's like to be angry or to be sad, and then we feel better. We use a coping skill and we help move on, because these feelings are something that happen, but they're temporary. They don't need to take over. And, that's an important life lesson for them.
I know this is a very serious show, and I usually try to be light in the shows once in a while, especially in serious topics, but it kind of reminds me of a Star Trek episode in the original Star Trek series with William Shatner. And Captain Kirk was somehow in a transporter accident, split into two different personalities. There was the meek Captain Kirk and the aggressive, angry Captain Kirk. And they were trying to figure out what to do. And I think the issue for the crew came up, should we get rid of, this bad Kirk? And they went to the meek Kirk to talk to us. He was like the more rational guy. And they said, essentially, what are we going to do with him? And he said, I need my pain. It's you got to put me back to be a whole person, because that's part of my whole person.
Yeah.
And even though it was a long time ago, I remember it from a very long time ago, it just seemed to have been very powerful, because I know that in certain, teachings of, in religions and things like that, you can't understand bad things without seeing good things.
Right.
So sometimes the explanation is why are there bad things in the world? Right. And sort of it's so you could appreciate that there's good things in beauty, and because without a contrast, we wouldn't understand the context.
Right. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. All right. This is Richard Solomon. I am with Vanessa McMullan, and we'll be right back. This is a really important topic. And if you want more information, you could always check back here or northshorechildguidance.org. We'll be right back.
Hi, this is Rory Cosgrove, and you're listening to Rich Solomon on WCWP 88.1 FM.
Welcome back. Richard Solomon, taking care of business with Vanessa McMullan. And she's just right here in Long Island at the North Shore Family Guidance. Are you right off of the expressway on the service road on the right side going eastbound?
Our main office is the eastbound service road in Roslyn Heights, between Roslyn Road and Glen Cove Road. Where I am is our early childhood center. We're on the service road going the other way in Manhasset by Christopher Morley Park.
Oh, sure. Know that well. So for people out there, their website is northshorechildguidance.org, and they have a really robust, plan for all kinds of things. And the more I hear, the more I feel that you guys do just a great number of things for the community.
Thank you.
For all of us out there who need this kind of information, thank you. All right, so we're talking about trauma and children and talking to them. Let's go through some very specific things.
Okay.
How do you explain to very young children what ultimately tragically could happen is the death of someone in a family, a grandparent, an uncle, God forbid a parent, but these things happen. How do you explain to younger children what that really is and how to deal with it? Especially, I remember going to the funeral of a friend, and he had a very young child, and I know that at the cemetery they sort of released a balloon into heaven, but it was crushing. It was just crushing on every level. It was just it was sad for everyone involved. Great human being, great family, tragic loss. Person died way too young. And it was one of those things, guy fought really hard, but his medical condition, superseded him. How do you explain that? How do you explain that to children that,
Well, that has to be one of the hardest conversations to have with a child. And, like I had said before, sometimes an adult's inclination is to just kind of ignore it as much as they can, and kind of maybe just see what the kid brings up, or, wait to see how things play out. And, it's a good, I think one of the reasons is that sometimes parents think that kids are going to ask a question that they're not going to know the answer to. And, especially when you're talking about something like death, that is something that as adults we don't have the answers to in a lot of ways. So it can feel like the right thing to avoid it because you either, don't know what to say, or you don't want to give wrong information. But a good place to start is to kind of start by asking the child where they're at. So what do they already know? What do they think is going on? Because again, depending on the nature of the death, that they've maybe been exposed to this illness for a long time, or it was something more sudden. Kids have tendency to make up their own things. So, tell me what you think happened to Dad, or tell me what you think happened to Grandpa. Can kind of get you understanding a little bit of their mindset, and let you know that either you may need to correct some misconceptions, or that they're maybe thinking about something that wouldn't even have been on your radar. For a lot of times when kids experience death, it prompts some it prompts questions about, well, can he still go to the bathroom? Or when is he coming home? Like, they don't necessarily understand the finality of it. And that happens at different ages, as they get a little bit older. So, you may, this is a conversation that a lot of times is when people incorporate their faith into it. They can talk about what they believe. But that's, again, a hard concept. It's an abstract concept for young kids. But it's okay to kind of start there and do it in very small, tolerable doses. And, you want to be clear in saying, you want to use words, unfortunately, like dead or died. You don't want to say things like they passed away or they're sleeping, because those, kids think those are not permanent. And in the past, kids have become afraid to go to sleep because people don't wake up. Unfortunately, once people die, they don't wake up from sleep. So that's not a concept that kids can wrap their head around. So you want to, say that means that they're not coming home. That means, sometimes kids will say, is he going to be back for my birthday? No, that means that he's not coming back for your birthday. He's not going to be here. And it's very harsh news to deliver, but you have to be as concrete as you can about it so that kids understand. And you also need to understand that they're not going to get it after one conversation. It's something that will become a little bit more clear to them as time passes and as they start to realize that this person isn't coming back. So, you want to have it, you want to broach the subject and talk, but then also give them a break. So you want to follow their lead. If they don't want to talk about it anymore, the conversation should be over. If they want to go and play and, forget about it, that's okay. There's really no wrong way to cope with this, because it's something that they don't understand yet, and it's something that's so overwhelming. They're just trying to bring back a sense of normalcy as much as they can.
So the follow-up question, and this is also in the field of tough, at what age do you bring children to a cemetery or to a chapel?
This is something a lot of parents ask. They want to know about the wake or the funeral, and the hard part is that there is no exact answer. We really try to handle it on an individualized basis, because you know what your child can handle. I've seen some very young kids be able to go to those services and participate, and they've done okay. Maybe they've gone and they would stay away from, the area that had the body, but they would be running around with their cousins, and to them it would almost be like a social gathering. But for some kids, it's really way too overwhelming, and they don't understand it. So it's good to kind of have that conversation. Some kids want the opportunity, when they're a little bit older, they want the opportunity to say goodbye. They want the opportunity to participate in the ritual. Whereas, younger kids, if they don't necessarily have the ability to make that decision, it's up to the parents. So, but it can be a hard thing to, for a young child to be in a room where everyone's crying or everyone's sad, or So if you don't think your child's ready, it's probably not a good idea to bring them. But that could range. We have some 10-year-olds who aren't ready.
I remember when my grandmother died, and I went to the chapel, and I just couldn't, when they said all rise and they brought the casket in, I just could not get it through my head that my grandmother was inside of that. It was just, and I was shielded from having to go to the cemetery.
Okay.
Which is probably a good thing at that point.
Right.
Because of my age at the time. But for me, I was just, I can't believe my grandmother is in there and that's it and we're done. I mean, like, I don't know, what the exact words were, but in substance, that's what my much younger brain was thinking.
Right.
And I was incredibly sad, and I had tremendous difficulty trying to just accept that this was a one-way deal.
Right.
And I don't know that there's much you can do for that, or talk to people.
I mean, the other, another, tip in all of this is especially when there's a death, the adults are struggling in their own way too. So as hard as it is, when you're helping your child work through this kind of issue, you need to try to have a sense of control. You can model that it's okay to be sad. You can model that, you don't have all the answers, but there has to be, it's terrifying for young children to see the adults in their life that they care about and that generally provide safety and security, for them to be out of control. Whether that's, angry or so sad that they, can't stop crying, that in some instances can be scarier than the actual death. Because if mom is so scared or if mom is so sad, then this is so bad. So, again, when you're struggling yourself, it's almost impossible to pull it together, but trying to find a way to do that when you're around the children or when you're around that conversation, to say that this is so sad, but we're going to be okay. And as the adults, that it takes a while. You might not even believe that, or it's going to take some time, but that's the message that the kids need to get, that they're going to recover from this, that the family is going to recover from this, and that, even in those moments, it's okay to be happy at times. That's something that kids struggle with sometimes, is if everybody's sad, well, I can't be happy, I can't enjoy anything. And, they still need to be a kid, they still need to laugh, and, that's okay, that's an okay thing for them to experience.
So, moving on, while we're in this topic of sort of tough stuff, how do you deal with sort of upheaval? And upheaval can consist of changing schools, I guess, second marriages, divorces, anything that's very transitory, or a transition to something completely different from the status quo. I assume that all of those events, even though they're different, have kind of the same impact. How do you deal with upheaval to children when their world has somehow been turned upside down? It's like, okay, we're moving,
Yeah.
right? Hey, we're moving to California,
Yes.
and it's sort of like, the child has friends, family, and there's an upheaval, or we have a new job and we need to move, or I'm sure military children have a very tough time because they move around a lot.
Right.
How do you deal with that in terms of supporting children and their fears and their stability concerns and the loss of friends and familiarity?
Well, part of it is, again, working with the parents or the adults around them to try to help them provide a sense of normalcy, a sense of consistency, even in these times. And a big part of what we encourage parents to do and what we would do in therapeutic setting is validation of feelings, which is, it's really hard to not have any control over this. You like where you live, you like your school, and to just be told, well, we're going to move, or, mom and dad is moving out. Kids are allowed to have feelings about that. They're allowed to have reactions. We want to help them keep those reactions in a safe, controlled way, but we can say, you can be mad. You can say, this stinks, or I hate this, or really just encouraging kids to kind of share those feelings. Then with the second piece of it saying, you can have those feelings, but this is still happening. So this is how we're going to help you. We're going to, if it's a move or something, it would be making a memory box. Or, for some kids with there's like a change in their family dynamic and someone's moving, it's, all right, well, let's make a very clear schedule of when you're going to see, or the next time you're going to see Dad, we're going to write it on the calendar, or we're going to set up this social media account so you can keep in touch with your friends. Trying to give kids ways to still be connected, to, process those feelings and not feel like it's happening so abruptly. We want to encourage those connections as much as we can. And then also encouraging them to use those coping skills that help them manage their feelings. Anything that can help control their anger. We do a lot of art projects or, like I said, a lot of physical or relaxation techniques, positive visualization, any of those things that can help them control those feelings in the moment, because those feelings are normal. Those feelings are allowed.
The problem is, what do you do with those feelings? I guess some of it makes great rock music and popular songs. If you ever notice, some of the greatest music comes from anger, pain, disappointment,
absolutely.
Tragedy. The Eric Clapton, right now on Showtime, they're doing the Eric Clapton documentary. It's called Life in 12 Bars. And he talks about Layla and and if you listen to the song, it's really a song about sort of a lot of very complex, deep emotional issues in a relationship. And what's very interesting is if you listen to the song when he first recorded it, you listen to the unplugged version many years later when he's just doing an acoustic guitar, and then you hear him many years later after that looking back at it, the whole thing, and he talks about the creation of the song and what was behind it, and it's very, very interesting. But great feelings make great music, sadly, So, to what extent can school help these kinds of situations? Because the problem is that, in my opinion, this is just opinion, we ask the schools to do too much. They, to be with the kids all day, and aside from teach them and nurture them, we ask them to do all kinds of other things, including give sort of like emotional support. And that's hard, that's a big burden. How can schools help in some of these upheaval type situations, especially at least when the school's involved, where all of a sudden you're a transfer student and you're being transferred in mid-semester and you're now the new person in the class or the new person in the grade, and maybe the community is well established and you're coming from some other place. Like, let's say you're moving from California to New York or something like that, and it's very different culturally, different climate-wise. Everything's different. How can a school and how can you all work together to kind of help that upheaval be less frightening?
Well, I think there's a lot going on in schools. Kids are busy from the minute they walk in those doors to the minute they exit, and then they've got homework and all of this other stuff to go with it. But schools definitely want to help kids in any way that they can, because a lot of it, even if it's technically not directly related to the schools, the academics get impacted. So if you have a kid who's stressed because they just moved, or they're worried about making friends, or they're upset about a home situation, that is going to possibly affect a children's ability to pay attention and be present and learn and follow directions or be a good listener in the classroom. So it definitely is in the best interest of the schools to, want to address any issues that they can and help kids. So we do usually encourage parents to let schools know what's going on. Obviously a school would be aware if a child just moved there, but if there's anything significant that's going on in the child's life, like family-wise, we usually recommend that the parents call like the school social worker or the teacher just to give them a heads up to say, if you see anything, if you notice anything, or if, you could check in on them. And, a lot of the times the schools are really very receptive to that. A lot of times, the staff in the lunchroom, you want to make sure that kids are connected. And, coming into a new school, and depending on the age, it can certainly be harder, but making sure that kids are, the existing kids are being as welcoming to a new student as possible, making sure that they have someone to sit with, or making sure that, just something simple like they're learning who everyone is in their classroom. Like, we can take for granted, like, oh, this is so-and-so, the new student, and, and now we're on to chapter 5. But, sort of facilitating some of these relationships right off the bat and staying in touch with the parents to say, it was a tough week, but we seem to be coming out of it. Or, this has kind of been going on a long time, and, your daughter doesn't seem to be getting acclimated here. Like, what do we think is going on with this? So it's just about keeping that relationship open so that the parents and the staff are keeping an eye on things, because there's going to be a typical period of adjustment. That's normal and okay, but we would want to make sure that the kids are getting settled and looking to see if there's a reason why they're not.
All right. Well, speaking of adjustment, we have to take a quick break here. We'll be right back. Richard Solomon and Vanessa McMullan. We'll be right back. Keep it locked in.
Hi, this is Anastasia Zotos from Athens, Greece, and we listen to Richard Solomon on our computers, and we love it.
All right, so speaking of upheaval, this is Richard Solomon taking care of business, and very tough stuff. We're talking about helping children cope with very tough issues. And what was interesting, my guest is Vanessa McMullan, and she's saying, well, sometimes adults have hard times either understanding or coping. And it kind of reminds me of a situation on The Simpsons where Homer's walking with God, and he's trying to find out all about the world. And he says, hey, God, what happens when you die? And God says, well, you'll find out, when that happens. And he goes, no, I really want to know now. And God gets a little angry and says, you can't wait 6 months? So anyway, so to lighten up a very serious topic. So in the realm of upheaval, let's talk about, siblings and the introduction of siblings to the family. Let's say you're a couple years old, a few years old, and all of a sudden you're going to find out that you're going to have a new brother or sister. Mm-hmm. And you're no longer the king or the queen or the prince or the princess.
Right.
What are the better strategies to sort of introduce that idea and how to help children? I remember that even though it's all a big concept, I remember seeing a particular young child, and when that person was introduced to their new sibling, there was a look of almost like loss and despair in their eyes. Like, well, what's going to happen to me now? Everybody's fawning over this new little creature.
Right.
How does that work?
Well, it's one of those typical life transition issues, but it certainly can be stressful, and it depends on the age. But a lot of times parents, involving the older child during the pregnancy, mom has a baby coming, and, they see the physical change in mom, and they get excited, and they're excited for the baby to come, and then, after like a day or two, they've had enough, and they're ready for the baby to go. So it takes a little adjustment to realize that this baby's here to stay, and as much as you kind of lay it out there like, oh, well, the baby might cry, or the baby's really going to need mommy and daddy, when it's actually in front of them, it's much more of a difficult situation to handle. So, again, it always really kind of comes back to validating feelings in a lot of ways, to say, I know it's different, or it must be hard that mommy's busy with the baby. Sometimes, especially for young kids, putting words to what they're experiencing or what they're feeling can be comforting, because they don't really know. A lot of times when kids, they don't necessarily have those the ability to make connections yet, so they're struggling. They might just be angry, or they might be sad, and they don't really know what that is. So, just really validating and trying to keep things as normal as possible is always a good thing. But we usually try to encourage parents to still try to give that older child a little bit of attention as much as they can. It's obviously easier when the parents have, it's a two-parent family, or there's help available to say, all right, grandma's going to take the baby, and me and you are going to go for a walk, or we're going to have lunch together. Something that still gives that child attention, because what do we know about children is they figure out ways to get attention, and if it's not positive, it's going to be negative. So that's why You hear a lot of times, typically, children are regressing. They might regress with their eating or their toileting or their sleeping, or they might try to crawl into the bassinet because they see this baby getting all of this attention and, hey, why won't that work for me? So you do want to give kids, as much individual attention. You want to make it positive. You want to encourage them, that you're a big boy or you're a big girl. You want to enlist them in helping wherever possible. Can you bring mommy the bottle? Or can you, go throw this diaper in the garbage can? Because, we know that kids like to feel like they're helping. And again, just also understanding that there might be some bumps, and it'll smooth itself out. But, it's something that it's really kind of turning their whole world upside down. So it's okay that they have some feelings about it and and even some behaviors.
Well, what's funny is I remember, this was really funny, a particular incident where there were some people I knew, and apparently there was a new child that was brought into the family, and there was already pre-existing siblings, and one of the children took like an object and kind of rubbed it, in a soiled area, and then went, give baby.
Oh. All right, well, there you go.
This child is now like 30, but I still remember it to this day. And, I guess, how do you quelch the jealousy or the fear that I'm not important, and so they don't do the things like that,
Yeah. Well, that's something that's going to take some time to evolve. It's because the older child is going to need to see how the new family, settles. That, mommy and daddy can love both of you, or, you're still important in this family, or you're still the big helper. That's not something that's going to happen immediately, so you kind of just got to wait it out a little bit. And like I said, encourage that positive attention, trying to keep their routine normal. So if they go to school, continue to encourage them to go to a school program so that their day and their expectation generally remains consistent, because that's something that helps kids with any transition is consistency, knowing what to expect. And as much as a baby turns things upside down, we want the other parts of their life to remain stable.
All right. So this show has just really went fast, and I definitely want you to come back, but we still have a few more minutes. So I want to touch upon one last topic.
Sure.
Marijuana seems to be legalized in a lot of places and is becoming legal in more and more places. How do parents talk to children about drugs, alcohol, cigarettes, vaping, all those things?
Well, it's something that you don't really want to. It's good to have open lines of communication. So that's something where, and especially as we talk about young kids and even just addressing hard topics, it's good to be an approachable parent in a lot of ways. And that doesn't start when, we typically think that maybe drug or substance use starts maybe like in adolescence. You want to kind of lay the foundation as early as possible to set boundaries and limits and talk about things and expectations younger. To set, especially, again, we touched briefly on technology and media and stuff, and being flooded with a lot of information. And it's coming from all different sources. It's very different than it used to be, because now, you're not just getting information from a trusted, you're getting information from someone's blog or someone's, feelings from their living room. So, kids, there's a lot of dangerous information that's being presented to kids. So again, part of it, number one, is really being very aware of what your children are exposed to, particularly through social media and technology. And anytime you see something, or anytime there's a noteworthy story or incident, it's always a good thing to use as a jumping off point. So, in terms of substance use, to say, I saw this was posted on your Facebook page, or this was posted on a YouTube channel. Like, have you seen it? What do you think about it? And sometimes, again, asking kids what they think is a good place to start, but making sure that parents really set a lot of, have a lot of boundaries and a lot of very clear expectations for what they want for their children, but in a way that's the conversation is going back and forth, that it's not, you can't do this. It needs to be a dialogue so that kids know if they're struggling with something or if there's something that comes up, they can come to the parent and ask them.
So how do we deal with this situation? Because I read about this in an article. It's fascinating. And the question was, let's say parents may have had either experimental use of drugs or an addiction that they've sort of overcome. How do they talk about that with children? Like if a child says, well, did you ever do this? Or did you ever do that? Or, did you ever try this? Like, what do you say? Is full disclosure necessary?
Full disclosure is, you want to censor information. You don't want to lie. A good rule of thumb is, always trying to pose it back to the children. If you're trying to at least take a moment to say, like, you know what, I'm not sure how to answer that question. Or you can say, well, why are you asking me? Do you think that, is it something that you just want to know, or do you think that my experience can help you? Like sometimes even you just need to buy a minute because, kids can ask you things that totally trip you up, whether it's about substance abuse or something else. And you don't want to ramble. You want to, gather your thoughts and say, all right, well, why do you want to know? Or, what do you think? And again, kind of asking them where they're at. You can give very limited information. You can say, there were things that I tried and I regret it, or it didn't work out well, or, I'm really not comfortable sharing that with you. But, adolescence is a funny phase because, kids they're struggling with being independent, but they're also still very needy in a lot of ways.
It's interesting because I kind of feel like that's sort of, at least contemporary, you see that more where it's like, I want to be independent, but I don't know how. And it's harder to be independent these days because, I remember hearing stories of, friends and colleagues, they left home when they were 16 or 17 and went to work and did this and that. I don't know anybody who could do that now. I literally have a friend, and she tells the story how she just 16, she moved out of the house, got a job, and that was that, and no big deal. And I'm thinking to myself, how can anybody do that now? Because most of the jobs that you would get at the age of 17 would pay so little, and the cost of obtaining some kind of reasonable housing would be way out of reach.
Yeah. Yeah, kids are not doing that anymore.
I'll tell you a quick funny story. This is a story that one of my friends always tells. Her father was a very tough guy, really tough guy, an Air Force pilot, World War II. And she had an encounter with the police. And the police said, all right, and she was very young. And they said, all right, we're taking you home. She goes, no, we're not. We're going to jail. Jail is better.
Wow.
And she said, believe me, jail is much better. So speaking of which, how do you deal with criminal stuff? Because that's what I wanted to transition to in the very last couple of minutes of this. There are children who sometimes get caught up with the law. Sometimes parents get caught up in the law. And I know everybody lawyers up and I'm a lawyer, but to me, there's so many psychological dimensions of legal problems and more importantly, criminal issues. I have cases where, unfortunately, children have stole the identity of their parents and then charged up all kinds of money, and then the parent is now facing legal issues. And I've had one situation where it was really extreme and things like that. How do you cope with that on a psychological level? Forget the law and the excuses and this and that. That's what the lawyers do. But I always see that the big void in the law in situations like that is, how do you deal with the underlying psychological issue that brought us here to the first place?
Well, that's a tough one. A lot of times
it's funny because I know that every situation is different.
Yeah.
But sometimes underlying there are addiction issues, irresponsibility, attention issues, emotional problems, trauma, post-traumatic stress issues.
Right. Rarely would criminal activity come out of nowhere.
Right.
And if it did, I would look more at like the social parameters of that, to say that this is a kid who would never have done that. who is he or she hanging out with, what's changed recently. You want to look at really the context. So, things like unfortunately criminal activity that can go hand in hand with substance abuse.
Gang activity.
We have, sometimes kids who are not stable with their emotional or their mental health. Maybe they're not taking their medication as they're supposed to. And as you're dealing with kids who are a little bit older, and again, you try to give them some independence or some, freedom, some children can't handle that. And that would be, a perfect example of kids who then are getting into trouble. But in terms of a treatment issue, you would want to try to explore, what's not stable in their life. So maybe it's that they need to be on medication, or maybe it's their social group, or maybe something's going on that we're not aware of. Maybe there's some sort of abuse, or there's a relationship issue that, then they're acting out in other ways. Again, we know kids seek attention. So it would really be trying to take a different, the legal, separate from the legal punishment or whatever, really trying to look at the child and say, well, what's going on?
So in my last question, and you've been phenomenal and helpful, and I'm sure that this audio will go to lots of places. When people see some kind of semblance of a problem beginning, how do they find you? How do they get to you? How do they suggest going to someone like you or your organization to start the path of healing and growth?
We, a lot of times families come to us by referral of schools. We're very well known in the academic community. We, if parents are interested, they can check out our website, northshorechildguidance.org. They can call any of our sites. We are always happy to give information. We, we're willing to work with you. Whether it be short-term work to, help families and teach them skills, whether it would be group work. We have wonderful groups, especially, for the adolescents. Their group is a great modality where they can be with other kids their age and really, know that they're not alone. We've got substance abuse programs. We're here to help you with anything that we can. And, it's...
And you'll continue to be there.
Oh, yes. We will continue to be here where, for better or worse, there are always people that are going to need our help. And, we help diagnostically. We work with families on prevention. We do trainings within the community. We're involved in research and advocacy projects. We're involved in several school programs throughout Nassau County, through Nassau BOCES. So we really are everywhere. And, we have such wonderful services. And even if you just had questions about if there was something going on with your child, we're always happy to take the call and help you out and steer you in the right direction.
All righty. Can't thank you enough. You've been generous with your time, full of wisdom and knowledge, and I hope that we get to see you and be with you again on the radio.
Thank you so much.
All right. So again, that's Vanessa McMullan, NorthshoreChildGuidance.org. This is Richard Solomon. We'll see you in a week.